Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. We begin on page 192. Ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu. Sing with me. Ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu. Va'ani berov chastecha avo veitecha, eshtecha ve'elecha al kodshecha be'iratecha. Ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu. Va'ani tefilati lecha, Adonai et ratzon, Elohim berov chastecha, aneni be'emet hishecha. Ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu, ma tovu.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. It's so good to be with you all. Every Shabbat we say that we've waited for this day for a long time, for at least 6 days, for this whole week to be over. And I know that today many of us have come to this sanctuary with much more anticipation, waiting perhaps years to watch our loved ones be called, or to be called ourselves, to the Torah. You are here today to witness and be part of something pretty extraordinary as 4 members of this congregation be called to the Torah as b'nai or benot mitzvah. But as we often also say, we're not just here to witness. We're not just here to watch. We're here to have an experience. We're here to really engage with Shabbat. And so each of you should have in your hands or nearby a book that looks like this. It says Mishkan Tefillah on it. If you do not have one of these, raise your hand. Don't be shy. One of our ushers will bring you one of these prayer books if you do not have one. You should have another book too for later. We'll get there when we get there. But this time, we need this prayer book. This is our Siddur. And if you've never been here before, it opens right to left, as many Jewish books do. And you'll find that the traditional text of the prayers is on the right side of the page, and on the left side is a more modern interpretation so that you can really have whatever experience you need to have this morning. And again, that is what we are called to do, have an experience. Today, as some of you know, is the 8th of Av, which means tonight begins Tisha B'Av, the traditional Jewish day of mourning. And perhaps we'll say a few more words about that later on, but today is, therefore, a complex set of emotions as we move into a day of mourning, but begin with great celebration. Of course, for our friends and loved ones who are called to the Torah, but also simply for the fact that we are alive. Jews celebrate every single week, hopefully every single day, but every single week, at least once on Shabbat, the fact that we are alive. And that's what this prayer book calls us to do, to go through these prayers, these intentions, these debates and arguments of our people, to really try to experience something. So perhaps you're used to this, perhaps you experience Shabbat each week, or perhaps you're here as an outlier in your yearly calendar. But I invite you to really take this seriously, whatever this is, this experience, to try to feel something this morning. We'll move throughout our prayer book, and we'll begin actually on page 194 with Asher Yatzar. And the version of Asher Yatzar that we'll be praying is not in your prayer book, however, one line is, and we'll get there soon. Asher Yatzar is a prayer that we say for understanding our bodies, for giving thanks simply for the fact that we have bodies that work, for the tubes and vessels, for the fact that we can breathe, that we can make it here today.
And to warm ourselves up to this experience, begin with a nice low whoa.
Body and
atah on the page. Baruch atah Adonai Rofech basar umafli la'asot. Baruch atah Adonai Rofech basar umafli la'asot. Oh, reaching higher. Oh, 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 Page 198. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, was given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. Matir asurim. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. Zokev kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our stems. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. Malbish arumim. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. Anoten layaif koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, remove sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who made me in the image of God. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. She'asani Yisrael. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. Ozer Yisrael bigvura. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. Oter Yisrael betifara.
Among those introductory prayers were two blessings that thank God for waking us up. Now, I don't know about you, Jordan, but I don't think this crowd is woken up quite enough.
Not quite.
So we need to perhaps turn to page 218 and actually bring your prayer books, if you are able to rise and join us up here at this lectern. We're going to pray Psalm 150 together up here, close, with as much distance as you need to feel safe. Close, waking up this morning with Psalm 150.
Don't be shy. We don't bite. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, El Bekocho. Hallelujah, Birkia Uzo. Hallelujah, Big Furota. Hallelujah, Kiro we go.
Hopefully that woke us up, got us ready to daven, and also ready to celebrate and to meet one another. So for now, just take 1 minute to turn to someone new. Meet someone you don't yet know. Say Shabbat Shalom, perhaps Mazel Tov. We will continue our service, and in a moment we'll invite you to take a seat. But for now, if you are rising, if you're still standing up here or wherever you are, we continue our service by facing east.
Page 224. Ikadal vitkadash merabah. Be'alma divrach yoteh v'yamlich malchuteh v'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayetechu beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'meru amen Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'alam u'alme'amaya Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitrama v'yitnaseh v'yidadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol mirchata tushbechata v'nechemata d'amiram be'alma v'yimeru amen Barechu
as we make our way to our seats, we turn to page 228 for Yotzer Or, a prayer giving thanks for light in the morning time.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Yotzer Osei shalom uvarei et hakol Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Yotzer or uvarei chashech Osei shalom uvarei et hakol
On page 229, You are praised, who rolls out the rough, raw clay of the universe into delicate vessels of light. And from nothing at all, we could perceive in a world that has turned old, a shimmering new creation right before our eyes, made this moment just for us. How much of life reveals your presence, how much Torah unfolds from each new flower, from each new wave that breaks upon the sea. You are praised, who forms from the clay that cloaks our lives, the delicate vessels which contain our light. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMeorot. With that blessing for light and that reading which calls us to think about our bodies as vessels for light, we move into another sequence of prayers that frame the Shema, that frame our most sacred text. And you may know that we frame the Shema, the watchword of our faith, the most important prayer in Judaism, with two other prayers that have to do with love. Ahava, Rabbah, followed by Shema, and then Ve'ahavta. And the reason we do this is that in our tradition, we understand that God shows God's love to our people by giving us the Torah. This is what every single day, every single morning is supposed to be, a meditation on God's love through Torah, through learning. And this morning, so many of us have come here to learn Torah, and this prayer not only wakes us up, but really gets us in the mood for learning. We're on page 230, and if you follow along in the English, there are a lot of verbs. There are a lot of verbs in this prayer. And you'll notice, especially at the end of that first paragraph, that there are a bunch of verbs that all have to do with God's love through Torah, which is to say that we are supposed to understand and discern, heed, learn, and teach, and of course also to observe, perform, and fulfill. That's a lot of work in Torah, but that's what we're called to do. We're called to be, through Torah, through Divarim, the words of Torah that we'll chant even today, we're called to find some kind of surprise. So as we move into this section, saying the Shema, thinking of God's love, thinking about Torah, we want to invite ourselves to be surprised by what we might learn today. Be surprised by what we might find in this book and what we might find in ourselves as we now turn to God's love through Torah.
asher b'amo Yisrael be'ahava. Page 232. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Page 240.
We now move into our Amidah beginning on page 242, and if you are able, we invite you to please rise. We start the Amidah each time we say it with the words Adonai Sifatai Tiftach. Adonai, open up my lips. And the idea is that we're supposed to open ourselves up to what might happen to us during this prayer. And many of you know, those of you who have taken our adult B'nai Mitzvah class itself know that this is often the time in services when people kind of zone out. When people sometimes don't know what's going on because there's a moment of silent reflection and there are all these prayers and really quite a few pages of Hebrew text. But this really is the moment. This is Hatfilah. This is the opportunity we have to check in with ourselves, to really open ourselves up to what might be. Perhaps those are words on the page or words in our soul, but we begin on page 242.
Ata Adonai Eloheinu Velohei Avotenu V'imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'konei hakol, v'zocher chasdei avot v'imahot, u'mevii geula lifnei v'neihem, leman shemo be'ahava. Melech ozer u'moshia u'magen, Baruch ata Adonai, Magen Avraham v'ezrat Sarah, ata gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechaye hakol ata rav lehoshia, Morid hatal, Mechakel chayim bechesed, Mechaye hakol berachamim rabim, Somech noflim verofeh cholim, Umatir asurim, Umekayem emunato, Lishenei afar. Micha mocha ba'al gevurot, umido melach, melech memit umechaye, umatzmiach Yeshua, v'ne'eman atal hachayot hakol, Baruch ata Adonai, mechaye hakol. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום. ככתוב היה נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה, ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך הארץ כבודו. Adonai, vador,
Dor vador,
ledor vador,
dor vador,
ledor vador nagi gad lecha, ledor vador,
dor vador,
ledor vador,
dor vador,
ledor vador nagi gad lecha, ulenetzach netzachim, ulenetzach netzachim, kedushatecha naktish, v'shichacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamush, le'olam, le'olam va'ed. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, gad gid gad lecha, ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador nagi gad lecha, baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh.
We continue praying silently.
Page 254. Ritzeh Adonai Eloheinu be'amecha Yisrael u'tefilatam be'ahava tekabel u'tehir ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael.
That melody at the end there is a melody that is especially appropriate for today, taken as it is from a piyut for Tisha B'Av, right?
Yes.
And we said before that this is a day of many emotions, a day as we celebrate, we meditate, we live, and also we think about mourning. We'll say more about that a little bit later, but now is the moment when we transition into a new part of our service, yet another set of feelings. And before we get there, before we get to our Torah service, I want to invite up Robin Baker, a member of our Board of Trustees, to offer us a few greetings on behalf of our board.
Shabbat Shalom. It's my pleasure on behalf of CBE's Board of Trustees to welcome all of you today. I want to say congratulations, Mazal Tov, to my classmates, Sue, Anna, Nicole, and Karen, for their B'nai Mitzvah today. Thank you to our clergy for leading us, Rabbi Green and cantorial intern Jordan Goldstein. Thank you to all the CBE staff members who are making it possible for us to be here today in person and virtually. For announcements of upcoming events in our community, please check out the CBE Weekly Advisory email or look on our website, cbebk.org. Shabbat Shalom.
All right. So, friends, now is the moment. And so we begin with Talis. We begin with our Benot Mitzvah this morning, receiving a prayer shawl. So we're going to call you forward to receive your Talises from important people in your lives. So in addition to you, we call forward Eitan Yavin, Susan's son, Dave Nemitz, Nicole's husband, Samuel and Joel David, Karen's sons, and Jason Permenter, Luz and Felix Permenter Rascoet, Anna's husband and children, to come up here and bring your Talises so that we can make this blessing together and move into our Torah service. Come on this side. Okay, let's say it together. 1, 2, 3.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitatef b'tzitzit.
Amen.
Amen.
And you can wrap that talis around your shoulders. But don't go anywhere, although presenters, you can have a seat, because it's now time to move into our Torah service. And so I need the 4 of you, Benot Mitzvah, to stay up here. And there are a lot of people who are going to be honored today, and we're just going to take our time naming them all. So for opening the ark to come forward now, we want to call forward June Alpert, Joy London, and Hannah Silberstein, as well as Courtney Feldman and Barry Epstein, Joel, Sam, and Sasha David, and Joshua Kina to join us up here. And on deck, those of you who are walking around with the Torah Processional, that will happen in just a moment once we take out the Torah. And I'm going to name you all too, so you know who you are. And you are Monica and Julia Yavin, Stephen Grossman, Dan Jacobs, Ruby Violet and Isaac Yavin, Leah and Jonah Grossman and Casey Gross, as well as Dave Frankian, Coco Nemitz, Jen Du, Craig and Jax Buckstein, Sasha and Joel David, and Luz and Felix Permenter Rascoet, Julia Mason, Caroline Wazer, Ying Zhang, and anyone else who wants to go up. But if I just called your name for the processional, wait for us to come down with the Torah. You'll know your moment. But we'll begin now on page 362, and please rise if you are able.
Ein kamocha va'Elohim Adonai, ve'ein k'ma'asecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha mitzvah coming close. Adonai Elohim.
Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Gadol Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Gadol Shemo.
No me.
Adonai iti, unerom lema shemo yachdav.
Lecha Adonai Haggadah v'Hagivura v'Hatiferet v'Hanetzach v'Hahod ki chol hashamayim u'ba'aretz ki chol hashamayim u'ba'aretz lecha Adonai hamamlacha v'minaseh lechol erosh. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kodesho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kodesho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kodesho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, ha'olam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, ha'olam omed. Al Torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Al Torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, ha'olam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, ha'olam omed. Al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah,
Please be seated. So we have now blessed this Torah a little bit. We're going to bless it a little more. But first, we're actually going to set this Torah in its seat for a moment. because there are 4 Benot Mitzvah this morning, which means that we have a lot of Divrei Torah to hear, a lot of words of wisdom. That's not funny. Why are we laughing at that?
It's a
I'm laughing because
thing.
you're laughing. It's not funny. There's nothing funny about this at all. There is a lot of Torah in this room, a lot of collective wisdom. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hear 2 Divrei Torah from our first 2 Benot Mitzvah, and then we'll move into reading from this scroll, and we'll continue on with our Torah service, and then we'll hear 2 more Divrei Torah after that. And I just want to say at the outset, I say this at most of these B'nai Mitzvah, that this is a pretty extraordinary thing, that 4 adults chose to do this, that they chose to take Torah seriously, to learn something new. And for those of you who don't yet know, 2 years ago is when we began this process. Officially, it was 1.5 years ago, but around 2 years ago, we made the announcement that we were going to have an adult B'nai Mitzvah cohort. And so many people said they wanted to actually do this. You did it. Whatever happens next, doesn't matter. Don't feel any pressure. You've already done the work. And it really is, for all of us, pretty extraordinary to witness this moment. For me, especially as your teacher and friend, but for all of us. I want to make sure everyone knows what it is that we're here to take part in. And so now we move into words of Torah. And first, I want to call forward Nicole Nemitz.
Get nice and close.
All right. Shabbat Shalom. Whoa, that is loud. All right. Here we go. So my daughters, Frankie and Coco, love Passover. The food, the 4 cups of juice, the afikomen, what's not to love? This year, however, I noticed something new that Frankie really connected with, the story. We hosted a play date with some non-Jewish friends after the holiday this year, and I started to overhear snippets of the kids' conversation. I realized that Frankie was telling a very detailed and accurate account of the Exodus story. I stopped and listened to her, and I was touched at how second nature the story already was to her at 6 years old, and by the excitement and passion with which she told it. I began to think about how important stories, and the words we use to tell them, are to Jews. We are the people of the book, after all. Torah scholars and Talmudists such as Rashi and Nachmanides debated across different centuries about our ancient texts, arguing over something so seemingly simple as the meaning of a single word. The Amidah, our central prayer during services, opens with the verse from Psalm 51. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Before we begin praying, we ask God to use us as an instrument to speak the words that we wish to say. And have you ever been involved in a Jewish goodbye? Because I am an expert, and let me tell you, it involves a lot of words. Seriously, what is it with us and words? This week's Torah portion, Divarim, literally means words in Hebrew. It opens with, these are the words Moses addressed to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan. Given the Parsha's title and the opening, it seems imperative that we should listen. Moses has led the Israelites out of Egypt, across the desert, and now they stand at the precipice of the Promised Land. Up until now, he's spoken God's word to the people, but in Divarim, the switch is made, and Moses is speaking in his own words. Divarim is a recap of their 40 years in the desert, and Moses is the main storyteller. He controls the narrative. At 2 points, he changes the story from what we read earlier in the Torah. First, Moses claims it was his idea to appoint heads and officials for each of the tribes. He even goes so far as to say that the Israelites praised him for it. Undoubtedly, it was a good idea, but it was actually his father-in-law's back in Exodus. Next, Moses rebukes the Israelites and blames them as the reason why he cannot enter the Promised Land. In reality, Moses must die in the desert because he disobeyed God by striking a rock to produce water instead of speaking to it, as God had commanded in Numbers. Why does Moses do this? By changing the words of the story, is he trying to make history more favorable to him? Or does he simply misremember? And aren't all of us guilty of both at various times in our lives? Our tradition does not shy away from pointing out our biblical leaders' humanities and shortcomings. In the end, does it really matter? The details might be a little different, a little more favorable to Moses, but the story on the whole and the message are essentially the same. And isn't the most important aspect of this the fact that Moses is teaching our people's story, ensuring its survival for future generations? In his book, What Do Jews Believe?, David Ariel discusses how, following the destruction of the First Temple in 586 BCE and the subsequent exile of many Jews to Babylonia, the practice of studying the Torah text itself became how Jews engaged with their Judaism, since temple sacrifices were no longer possible. Fathers were obligated to teach their sons and have them read the Torah, and adults were encouraged to continue Torah study so that the population could pass down the stories and the rituals. This emphasis on Torah study and written prayers became crucial after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Given the permanent loss of our central place of worship, the very survival of Judaism and the Jewish people could have been in jeopardy had Jews not already developed an alternative to sacrifice. One of the most famous alternatives to traditional sacrifice is the Passover Seder, at which we read the Haggadah. The word Haggadah itself means telling, in direct reference to the line in Exodus, "And you shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt." And so we do. We tell our children, family, and friends every spring. And even when we think that our children may not be listening to us, they most likely are learning something about the story of our people. In Frankie's instance, enough to pass it along to some of her friends. And when you consider the history of our people, repeatedly subjected to terror and forced into exile and flung across a large diaspora, we understood that our children would eventually act as conveyors of memory. In their book, Jews and Words, Amos Oz and his daughter Fania Oz Salzberger write, "The true key to our continuity as a people has been our obsession with words, spoken, written, recited, and quoted." Moses launched the story on Mount Sinai over 3,000 years ago, and now Frankie is continuing to tell it. And as I sat listening to her, it dawned on me that this was one of the reasons I converted. I wanted to ensure that my husband Dave's family's story lived on. Not just their story, but the story of their ancestors. And not just the story, but the entire beautiful tapestry of that story. The traditions, rituals, prayers, food. These are all pieces of the puzzle that make up the story, connecting and intertwining us with ancestors from long ago and far in the future. With that in mind, these words Moses spoke can be viewed with utmost importance. They are what endures through all the hardships and the simchas, and are a critical element for what sustains the Jewish people. In Exodus, Moses himself humbly admitted how he was slow of speech, saying, "Lo ish divarim anochi," I am not a man of words. But by divarim, he found his voice. I too have found my voice in this process, first in becoming Jewish and now by affirming my Jewishness. I want to use that voice to transmit Judaism and what it means to be Jewish to my kids. All the beauty, joy, strength, resilience, and yes, the ever important words of the story. Moses lent us his voice to give us the story, and it's up to each of us to find our own voice so that we can continue to tell it. Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher Koach, Nicole. And now we turn to Sue Yavin to offer us a few more words of Torah.
On a brilliant afternoon, Sunday afternoon, Vanderbilt Playground in Prospect Park was bursting with activity. Around the lake, as afternoon faded into evening, a pall seemed to settle on the park. All of us in New York City were in the last days of semi-conscious denial. The very next day, we would begin the COVID lockdown, and the dark days of spring 2020 would be upon us. Walking home with my daughter Elah and grandkids Leah, then 8, and Jonah, 6, Elah suddenly stopped and said, "Mom, I can't do this." Her fear was real. How would she provide for or protect her family? How could her children go to school? Struggling to comfort her, I finally said, Elah, think about your great-grandmothers and what they faced. You come from courageous women. You are a strong and courageous woman. I took a deep breath, waiting for my daughter's usual pushback, but it never came. We walked home in silence. I feel that courage is baked into the Jewish DNA. In today's Parsha, Moses is retelling the story of the Exodus. We learn that only the Israelites, brave enough to fight the mighty kingdoms of Canaan, are rewarded with entry to the land promised to them by God. Those who succumb to their fears are doomed, like Moses, to gaze at the Holy Land from a distance. Caleb and Joshua lead the Israelites to Canaan and enter the pantheon of heroic fathers. But what of the mothers? And God says, your children who do not yet know good from evil shall enter it. Surely those innocent children did not enter Canaan without their mothers. In the Bible, women are heard loudest in their resounding silence. However, throughout our history and my own family's history, women loom large, awesome, and courageous. Imagine it is 1939. A once privileged young Jewish woman from the Sudetenland and her 3 sons are now homeless. Her 16-year-old son is leaving on his own, trying to get to Palestine. The 12-year-old is the recipient of a much-coveted ticket provided by a Jewish organization to rescue Jewish children. He will be going to Palestine as well. His little brother is left behind, deemed too young to be separated from his mother. Imagine it is 1942 in Nazi-occupied Poland in a small town called Zetel. A 9-year-old boy is digging a hole right outside his home, which is now in the ghetto and shared by 5 families. He is covered in dirt, and his mother, her nerves frayed, yells at him. She is traumatized by the recent murder of her husband. The boy explains that he is digging the hole so that they can hide from the Germans. The next day, his mother, ever resourceful, produces some ill-begotten shovels. She shrewdly cajoles the little boy's uncle, a woodsman, to take them into the forest. He is frightened and says that they will surely die there. They finally escape the ghetto one day before it is liquidated with the massacre of 2,500 Jews. About the same time in the very same town, a young mother and her 12-year-old daughter enter the forest. They remain there for 2 years, surviving the freezing cold winters, near starvation, typhus, and unspeakable humiliation. Of the 800 of Zetel's Jews who managed to escape to the forest in 1942, barely 200 walked out alive. Among them were my grandma Leah and my father, the little boy who started digging the hiding place, my grandma Sonia, and my mother as well. The date is August 6th, 1942, when 450 years of Jewish history ended in Zetel, both of my parents' hometown. The 12-year-old boy from Czechoslovakia is Eyal's father. He reached Palestine in 1939, where he was reunited with his older brother. Their mother, Olga Weil, and little brother Hans Peter died in Auschwitz. Olga's legacy lives on in the children she so courageously sent away into the unknown. I am humbled thinking of the strength of these women. I consider my own journey and identity intertwined with the trauma and resilience of the generations before me. My life feels insignificant by comparison, and yet my identity is formed from their struggle, their pain, their pride, and their resilience. All of this together is my story, is our story. Every journey in Judaism has both pain and healing, mourning and devastation, give way to joy and elation. Tonight marks the beginning of Tisha B'Av, the day commemorating our collective disaster. History collapses and we feel it all at once, every generation's suffering compressed into a single day. But mourning gives way to joy, and in 5 days we celebrate Tu B'Av in the Festival of Love. Preparing for this bat mitzvah was a journey more intellectually and spiritually nourishing than I ever imagined. Each Torah study helped illuminate my family history, adding relevance to the ancient text and urgency to current events. I think about the wisdom I wanted to share with Elah that Sunday afternoon before the COVID lockdown, and I think about the lessons I would like to impart to the next generation and those to come. Much has been made of inherited trauma, and it is real, but I believe that out of calamity, we heal by continuing our tradition. We are a people imbued with strength, courage, and resilience. By studying Torah and reinterpreting our rituals and life cycle events, we create a living memory filled with new meaning, joy, and relevance. This is our legacy and what we must pass on to the future generations. I look out at my children and grandchildren, family and friends, and this community, and I can't help thinking that exactly 80 years ago today, my family's world ended in Jettel. Yet, here I begin a new chapter as a bat mitzvah. I will never think about our story without reflecting on our connection to the heroines of our family, our people, and the steadfast faith of the silent mothers of Sinai, leading their children to the promised land. Like the countless others who, as we sit here, are making impossible choices, we cannot allow ourselves to be paralyzed by fear. The brave and courageous inherit the future and pass it on to the generations. It is said that there are no mistakes in the Torah and that every single word has significance, intention, and meaning. With that, I discovered that the first word of Dvarim, Eleh, matches exactly my firstborn's name, Elah. We changed the order of the letters to make the name Leah, our granddaughter's name, who is the first of her generation in our family. She is named from my grandma Leah, who took her family into the forest and survived. The gematria, or Hebrew numerological value of all three words, Eleh, Elah, and Leah, is 36. Life times 2. L'chaim indeed, magical, mysterious, and miraculous. Shabbat Shalom. Do I get to stay up here now?
Yasher Koach, Sue. We've had a moment now, we've had a few moments to reflect on the fact that in this service are many different feelings. In any service, there are always so many different feelings that come up for us. Perhaps because we're human beings and that's what we do with hours by ourselves, but also because of what we hear and what we speak. And already we've heard 2 extraordinary works of Torah, and I'm so moved by both of you. And I know all of us here are so moved by your words and excited to celebrate with you today. We also move into this moment of collapsing time, the way you spoke about, Sue, as we read Torah. We'll move into reading our most ancient text now, and as we do, we are enacting an ancient script. We are feeling our ancestors with us in this moment as we read their words. And this is the moment that pivots, and we turn now to a different book. You'll need a chumash in your hands. You'll need this book here. It says the Torah on it. That's what it is. Of course, there's also some other beautiful commentary and other texts in there as well. And if you have that chumash, we're going to be starting on page 1161, 1161. And as you've now heard, we're reading from Parshat Devarim. This is the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy. It's a sort of grab bag of different aspects of the Israelites' history and different mitzvot, different commandments. Sue will be chanting Deuteronomy 1, verses 1 through 8, and you can look at the different verses we'll be chanting in your program. We call you forward, Sue. And also, to join you for this aliyah, we call forward Eyal Yavin as well.
Baruch et Adonai hamevorach.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן.
אלה הדברים אשר דיבר משה אל כל ישראל בעבר הירדן במדבר בערבה מול סוף בין פרן ובין תופל ולבן וחצרות ודי זהב 11 ימי חורף דרך הר שעיר עד קדש ברנע ויהי ב40 שנה ב12 חודש ב1 לחודש דיבר משה אל בני ישראל ככל אשר ציווה אדוני אותו עליהם אחרי הכותו את סיחון מלך האמורי אשר יושב בחשבון ואת עוג מלך הבשן אשר יושב בשטרות באדרעי בעבר הירדן בארץ מואב הואיל משה באר את התורה הזאת לאמור אדוני אלוהינו דיבר אלינו בחורב לאמור רב לכם שבט בהר הזה פנו שאו לכם ובואו הר האמורי ואל כל שכניו בערבה בהר ובשפלה ובנגב ובחוף הים ארץ הכנעני והלבנון עד הנהר הגדול נהר פרת ראה נתתי לפניכם את הארץ בואו ורשו את הארץ אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיכם לאברהם ליצחק וליעקב לתת להם ולזרעם אחריכם. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת, וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Yasher Koach.
Yasher koach indeed.
And now for our second Aliyah, we call forward Nicole Nemitz. And Nicole, you're starting at verse 17 and going through verse 21.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamavarach.
Baruch Adonai Havarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamavarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Lo takiru fanim bamishpat kakaton kagadol tishmaun lo takuru mipnei ish ki hamishpat le'Elohim hu v'hadavar asher yikshe mikam takrivun elai ushmativ va'atzave'echem ba'et hahi et kol hadavarim asher ta'asun vani samech orev vanelech ei kol hamidbar hagadol v'hanorahu asher re'item derech har ha'emori ka'asher tzivah Adonai Eloheinu otanu vanavo ad kadesh barnea va'omar alechem batem ad har ha'emori asher Adonai Eloheinu noten lanu re'eh natan Adonai Elohecha lefanecha et haaretz aleresh ka'asher diber Adonai Elohei avotecha lach al tira v'al techat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chaye olam nota b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Yasher Koach. And now, for our third Aliyah, we call forward Karen David. And alongside her, we call forward a few people. We call Anshul and Sasha and Isabel David as well. Karen, your husband and grandchildren.
Isabel and Sancho, she's in California.
First word right there. If you want to touch your tallis.
Baruch atah Adonai Hambarak.
Baruch
I'm sorry, Baruch Adonai Hambarak.
Baruch Adonai Havarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambarak le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Swap places.
We've got right there.
right here, yes?
Vatikrevun Elai Kulchem Vatomru Nishlecha Anashim Lefanenu Vayakperu Lanu Et Haaretz V'yashivu Otanu Davar Et haderech asher na'aleba ve'et ha'arim asher navo alehem vayitav ve'enai hadavar va'ekach mikem shneim asar anashim ish echad lashavet vayivnu vaya'alu hahara vayavou ad nachal eshkol vayiraglu Ota. Baruch Adonai, Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam nata b'kochenu, Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen.
Yasher Koach.
Shabbat Shalom.
And for our last Aliyah, we call forward Anna Raskoet Paz, who will be chanting, as well as Jason Permenter and Joshua Kina to join us for the Aliyah.
Let's make sure we get the right spot first. That came out a little bit. Excuse me. Try and gotcha. So you like column. Like just no, not quite all the way. There we go. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorah.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorah Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bahar Banu Mikol Hamim Venatan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
והערבה והירדן וגבול מכנרת ועד ים הערבה ים המלח תחת אסדות הפסגה מזרחה ואצב אתכם בעת ההיא לאמור אדוני אלוהיכם נתן לכם את הארץ הזאת לרשתה, חלוצים תעברו לפני אחיכם בני ישראל, כל בני חיים. רק ושכם וטפכם ומקניכם ידעתי כי מקנה רב לכם ישבו בארצכם אשר נתתי לכם. אשר יניח אדוני לאחיכם ככם, ויושעו גם הם את הארץ אשר אדוני אלוהיכם נותן להם בעבר הירדן. ושבתם איש לירושתו אשר נתתי לכם, ואת יהושע ציוויתי בעת ההיא לאמור, עיניך הרות את כל אשר עשה אדוני אלוהיכם לשני המלכים האלה, כן יעשה אדוני לכל הממלכות אשר אתה עובר שמה. לא תיראום כי אדוני אלוהיכם הוא הנלחם לכם. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נותן בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Yasher Koach to all four of you. That was extraordinary. And now, at this moment before Haftarah, with the Torah still in our presence, we turn, as we do each week, to words of Mishaberach, our prayer for healing. And so if you're thinking of someone right now in need of a little extra koach, a little extra strength, healing of mind, body, or spirit, we ask you to actually share their names out loud so that all of us can hear at the break in between the stanzas of our prayer. And I'll move throughout the room and invite you to share names as my eyes meet yours. We're on page 371.
Misheberach avotenu mekor habracha ve'imotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen.
We pray for healing on behalf of the following people.
Mekor habracha avoteinu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
It is now time to lift and dress the Torah. And so we want to call forward Susan's children, Oren Yavin and Ela Yavin, to join us here at the Bima to first lift and then dress. And please rise if you are able.
We're also on page 370. V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe livnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai v'yad Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Morashat Keilat Yaakov, Morashat Keilat Yaakov, Morashat Keilat Yaakov, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Torah tziva lanu Moshe.
Yasher koach to you both. Please be seated. We're doing things a little bit out of order since we've already heard two contemporary Divrei Torah, some teachings of Torah, but we move now chronologically through time as we move from the Torah reading into the Haftorah reading, a text from prophets thematically related to the Torah portion. And this one you can actually follow along with us in the book that says Torah. You can follow along on page 1182. But this text is actually, unlike many Haftarot, it's actually a special Haftarah for today, this Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. So Nicole, we call you forward. You are our chanter of Haftorah. And those of you following along can take a look in the commentaries and at the text itself from the prophet Isaiah, why this might be a text for a day of mourning as we're heading into. You ready? And once again, that's page 1182 in the Chumash.
Is he okay holding this? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza v'divreihem han'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah uv'Moshe avdo uv'Yisrael amo uv'invi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek. Rachatzu hizaku hasiru roa ma'alelechem minaged einai chilu hareah limdu hetev dirshu mishpat ashru chamotz shiftu yatom rivu almanah Lechuna v'nivachecha yomar Adonai imihiyu chataechem kashanim kasheleg yalbinu imiyadimu chatola katsamer yehiyu Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Sur kol ha'olamim, zadik v'chol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman, ha'omer ve'oseh, ha'madaber u'mekayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al avodah, ve'al hanavim, ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת.
Amen. Yasher Koach yet again. Excellent work, Nicole. And in the spirit of seeing Torah move through time, we've now seen Torah, we've seen Haftarah, we've heard those prophetic words chanted, and now we return to contemporary words of Torah, words of the modern day. And so first, or rather next, we'll hear from Karen David, who will offer us her Devar Torah.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I am dedicating my Bat Mitzvah and Devar Torah to Jewish women in my family who could not be called to the Torah, to honor the memory of my maternal great-grandmother, Hasha Nahama, for whom I was named, who was deported from Minsk to Siberia by Stalin. My maternal grandmother, Jenny, Shana Leah, who emigrated in 1904 from Vilna, Lithuania, with her rabbinic family to Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. My mother, Rebecca, Rivka, who emigrated from Flatbush, Brooklyn to East Norwich, Long Island, and helped found a synagogue that still exists in Oyster Bay. My mother-in-law, Bina, Chaya Blima, an ardent Zionist from her early years, who emigrated in 1934 from the shtetl Zabotov, Poland to New York City. Also in recognition of my California granddaughters, daughters of our son Joel, who emigrated from Park Slope to Los Angeles. Our older granddaughter is Isabel, Chaya Rivka, a bat mitzvah in 2021. Our younger is Sasha, Aviva Leah, a future bat mitzvah. I hope to inspire them as they strive to create their own Jewish identities. In 2018, my husband Anshel and I traveled to Israel and Jordan, first to Eilat and then to the ancient city of Petra. We stayed the night in Jordan, returning the next day to Israel with a stop at Mount Nebo, east of the Jordan River, in what was the biblical land of Moab. According to Deuteronomy, Mount Nebo is where Moses was granted a view of the Promised Land before he died. The view of Israel in the distance, the majesty of the mountains, and the sense that the Israelite people and thousands of years of destiny unfolded from that very place created an epiphany for me. This was the place where Moses gave the people a final prescription for structuring civil society when they enter the land, which happens to be the subject of this week's Torah portion. In Deuteronomy 1, verses 15 to 17, we read a formula for organizing the Israelite justice system. Verse 15 lays out a structure for civil society, like in our own country, into ever smaller groupings of people. These leaders are to be people with wisdom, which implies knowledge, good judgment, and experience. Verse 16 describes the aspiration for justice, that is fairness, that all are to be given the opportunity to be heard, and treated equally before the law. Specifically, the text says, "Hear out your fellow Israelites and decide justly between one party and the other, be it a fellow Israelite or a stranger." In verse 17 we read, "You shall not be partial in judgment. Hear out low and high alike. Fear neither party, for judgment is God's." Many of us might agree with the ideal set forth in this verse. Not partial in judgment implies not prejudging based on a person's rank or appearance or glib speech or the judge's preconceived attitudes before evidence is presented. But what does it mean in verse 17, to fear neither party, for judgment is God's? Rashi, the medieval French commentator on the Bible and Talmud, interprets this verse to mean that God is saying to human beings, whatever you take from this man unjustly, you will compel me to restore to him. It follows, therefore, that you have wrested judgment against me. To paraphrase Rashi, the phrase "judgment is God's" implies that if you judge a person incorrectly, then you have actually committed a sin against God because you have taken the ability to judge that person and punish that person away from God. Therefore, be as cautious as possible when making judgments about crime and punishment, and always leave room for both doubt and the possibility of rehabilitation. If judgment is God's alone, then try as we might, as fallible human beings, we aren't actually able to judge people, but we can approach judgment and punishment with kindness and mercy as an achievable approach to the spiritual component. The Jewish attitude expresses rehabilitation and reintegration into society. There is no perpetual punishment in the Torah. Jewish law, its elaborations and interpretations over centuries, generally suggest that the emphasis of our justice system should be renewal. In Maimonides' classic text about Teshuvah, he writes that a person is truly penitent if they're presented with the same opportunity to sin that they committed previously, and they resist that second temptation, and they do not commit that sin again. Perpetual life imprisonment without parole denies the opportunity to demonstrate true repentance, as there is no opportunity for independent action in prison. In our own time, the Chabad Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson did not believe in prison at all, because that abrogates the person's ability to serve God, because if you don't have any will to act on your own, to be a servant to God when you are imprisoned. So again, the focus should be on rehabilitation, a return to society, and treating prisoners with humanity. That seems to suggest prohibition of physical and psychological torture, including solitary confinement, restoration of voting rights upon release, even for convicted felons, and I would posit even when in prison, restoration of the opportunity to serve on juries upon release. Society should strive toward a goal of ultimate release by disallowing sentences of life without parole and focus on comprehensive rehabilitation, helping prisoners on a path to redemption and affording opportunity to ask and merit forgiveness from the victim and from society. Recognizing our common humanity, the Brooklyn Public Library, partnering with the New York City Department of Corrections, allows family visits to the imprisoned via video calls from branch libraries. The Manhattan District Attorney has developed a program for redirect, in some instances, to mental health providers, with incarceration as a last resort. In New York, people in jail for misdemeanors can vote even from jail. Also in New York, felons can vote once released, even if the release is on parole. That is because of an important reform a year ago, restoring voting rights immediately to those on parole or probation, so ending parole disenfranchisement, which impacts minority communities heavily. These examples are concordant with treating wrongdoers humanely and restoring people to society. New York's approach is more liberal than many states and less so than a few. In sentencing, more than 50,000 people in the U.S. are serving sentences of life without parole. In 2021, only a few states disallowed such sentences. Children who commit murder can be sentenced to life without parole in many states. Pennsylvania has several hundred juvenile lifers. New York State permits this, but as of 2021, no one was serving such a sentence. These approaches are not concordant with Torah teaching and Jewish tradition. There are other problems with how we treat people who have committed crimes: jury selection, fairness, limitations on jury duty post-release, the persistence of the death penalty. I am not an attorney. Mr. Google makes all this information and more readily available. The verses in Deuteronomy are guidance for an equitable society, looking toward the imperfect judgments of men and women with an eye toward the continuing opportunity for society to correct its own mistaken judgments and the ever-present possibility of true repentance and true redemption on the part of those convicted of crimes. Our ideals and the ideals of ancient Israel are not very different, and we know some of the ways the Israelites fell short. Though today we are not literally standing on Mount Nebo, looking into the promised land like Moses, we are spiritually back at that moment when we read Deuteronomy. Therefore, each of us can consider and work to create the society in which we want to live, based on our ideals and Jewish values. I want to add an additional comment. I am so glad that all of you could be here today to share our collective joy. And I want to greet my family and friends across the United States who are viewing the live stream, especially Isabel, our granddaughter in Los Angeles. And of course, my husband Angel, sons Sam and Joel, and granddaughter Sasha are with me here today. I want to thank Rosalind Koch for teaching me the Aleph Bet, Cantor Josh Breitzer for his chanting in slow motion so I could catch his words and rhythm, and of course Rabbi Mike Green for sharing his extensive Jewish and Torah knowledge in such an engaging way, and his encouragement and support throughout. Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher Koach, Karen. And now we turn to one final Devar Torah this morning, this time from Anna Raskoet-Paz.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Fair warning, I'm going to lose it a few times, probably. But, this Parsha, it opens with, these are the words, Devarim, it's the title of the Parsha, that Moses spoke to all of Israel. So it would make sense for me to focus on Moses' teachings. And many commentators have done it before. Just look at the writings of the late Jonathan Sachs on Devarim. His titles for his Divrei Torah, the leader as a teacher, the teacher as a hero, Moses, the leader, the teacher, the hero. But instead I want to focus on the end of the Parsha, the last few verses that I chanted earlier, because in that moment, I think Moses steps fully into his power, but he doesn't do that as a leader or as a hero. I think he does it as a parent. So just imagine, right? Moses is standing there, Be'eve Hayardein, on the other side of the Jordan, and he can see the promised land. Zion is right there, right across the river. And this is the end of the road for him. So in the last few verses of the Parsha, after retelling to all of Israel the story of the last 40 years, he adds that it is now in Yehoshua's hands. he lets go. Letting go. It feels really antithetical to power, in so many ways, because when you think power, you think strength, endurance, decisiveness, the alpha, the muscle, the steel. Moses breaking the tablets in righteous rage, or Jacob struggling all night with an angel, or Abraham braving his grief to sacrifice his son. Letting go, though, that feels dangerously close to quitting. Yet by the river, this is what Moses does. To understand the significance of his act, here we go. I told you. I want us to look at a decision made by another parent 120 years prior on the banks of another river. Rewind. Parshat Shemot, 2 books ago. The Israelites are enslaved, and Pharaoh's decree falls upon them like a cleaver. All Israelite baby boys must drown in the Nile. Yocheved, daughter of Levi, granddaughter of Jacob, births a boy. He is 3 months old when she puts him in a basket and lets him go. Off he floats. On the Nile, not in the Nile. This is where the road ends for her. It's now in Miriam's hands. And I just want everybody to think about what it takes for Yocheved to do something like this. At a time when anybody who's had a baby will tell you, ungluing that little ball of flesh from your skin feels like a visceral impossibility. It's a desperate choice. It's zero guarantees. Yet what she sets in motion with this gesture is an upheaval of epic proportions. That instant, she becomes the mother of 600,000 children. This is according to Rabbi Judah Hanassi. She becomes the mother of a nation. Back to Devarim. As Moses stands by the Jordan, asking a man who could be his grandson to finish his life's work, he takes a cue from his mother. Moses has helped birth this people. He has pulled them out of Egypt and guided them across the desert to the border of their land. But he is done. They will go on without him. Now, if contemporary Jewish parents are known for anything, it's not for being chill. Our approach to child rearing, it's funny, all the jokes, it's rooted in anxiety, they say. It manifests as this pathological inability to let go with expectations so huge we bury our kids under them. Sit straight. Or you thought life was supposed to be easy. Or I'm cold, kid. Put on a sweater. Is that me? Yeah. But from Yocheved and Moses to the Kabbalistic idea of tzimtzum, according to which God shrinks to make space for us, to Jewish parents in the 30s and 40s, thinking of you, Sue, sending their children away so they can live. You could argue that the dominant model for parenting in Jewish history is letting go. Now, this doesn't mean throwing them out there defenseless. Yocheved gave Moses a basket, and she was very strategic. She placed him on the river upstream from Pharaoh's daughter's bathing spot, and she entrusted him to Miriam. Moses gave his people their freedom, his teachings, and he entrusted them to Yehoshua to cross the Jordan. God gave us Torah and entrusted us to God's creation. Parents can let go because our tradition helps us teach the children. As Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari said, we should still make the effort as adults, teachers, historians, to come up with big stories. The kids, can always reject them. They can always reject them, but if they do, let it be from a place of knowledge. We obsess over children's learning. We fall over ourselves to nurture it. We give them sweets when they start to read. We give the youngest center stage at Seder, which cannot start without their questions. We pelt them with sweets when they learn to chant Torah. Please be gentle later, guys. What we overlook is that in teaching them, we also teach ourselves. Because to explain something, you must clarify it in your mind first, right? When you're faced with someone who's disagreeing and asking you tough questions, you receive the chance to open up and change, maybe. I didn't make this up. In the Talmud, imagine the scene, the rabbis are chatting as usual, and one of them says, and all your children, banayich, shall be taught of Adonai, and great shall be the peace of your children. And the others respond, do not read banayich, your children, but bonayich, your builders. What makes a Jew? We could answer this by looking at our ancestors. But my favorite answer, which needs a little bit of unpacking, is that of Talmudic scholar Adin Steinsaltz. A Jew is someone whose grandchildren will be Jewish. You want to know who you are? Look downstream. On Friday nights at our house, we light the candles, we bless the wine, we eat the challah, and we play songs, to pace the ritual. But instead of reciting the blessing over children, we play Bob Dylan's Forever Young. And I press down hard on their heads, and I whisper the lyrics in their ears. May you always do for others, and let others do for you. But now I've told you, now you know. What I'm really saying is, may I teach you, and may you build me. And may I live long enough to let you go. Okay, so this is 15782, and I believe in choice. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you all to procreate. Not my thing. But Steinsaltz's grandchildren, I don't think they need to be related to you. They are the idea that each of us, parent or not, can push baskets on this river. So I'll leave you with a blessing. May you all have in your lives people much younger than you. May they challenge you. May they tear you down. May they rebuild you. And above all, may you let go and let them. Shabbat Shalom.
Not a dry eye, Anna. It is, as I've said a number of times now, pretty amazing just to watch you all go through this, to watch you all reach this moment after so much study. But I think the moment that really got me there at the end was actually, Anna, when you referenced Sue. And when you looked up at her, and the way in which the four of you play off of each other, which is the whole point. It's the whole point of doing this adult B'nai Mitzvah experience. We have now heard you chant Torah, live Torah, sort of, teach Torah, most importantly, but we've also seen you become a community. And I hope that all those who are witnessing this moment can feel inspired to learn, to teach, and also to just get involved in ways that surprise them. Each of you, in different ways, also came to this process with some hesitation. And here I want to lift up something you said, Nicole, which was when you reminded us that early on Moses is slow to speech, and yet here he is by the end of Deuteronomy, or rather by the end of the Torah at Deuteronomy, and he's found his voice, he's found his words. And each of you have done exactly that, offering us an example for how we can do the same. And what I want to do now, as I've been doing at all of these B'nai Mitzvah, is invite you individually to come up here for a blessing. And don't go anywhere. Once you come up, please stay up here. And first, Nicole, I want to invite you forward. Nicole, I remember meeting you in my office shortly after I came into the role of assistant rabbi here. It was 4 years ago, and you'd already gotten pretty far on your journey toward Judaism with Rabbi Katz. I'd thought that my role was just to come in and help you complete the process, maybe a meeting or two before the mikvah. But I soon realized that you were ready to dive deep into Jewish life and CBE, deeper than any of us really thought, with classes and groups and services and also as an ECC parent. Think back to who you were 4 years ago, when all this was still pretty foreign to you. And compare that version of you to the Jew you are today, chanting not just Torah, but also Haftorah, imparting your wisdom, and also show everyone the earrings. I don't know if you in the back can see, perhaps they're glittering, but Nicole has multiple pairs of earrings that are Jewy and big. As the years unfold before you, may that sparkle and that spark of Torah that is so alive in you continue to ignite a love of our tradition in you, your daughters, your family, and friends. May you never be far from this place, and may this community luxuriate in the joy of seeing Judaism through your eyes. And now, Sue Yavin, if you'd like to join us. Sue. You frequently refer to yourself as a newbie to all this Jewish stuff. You also came to CBE just a few years ago after building your family in a different shul, in a different borough, different movement, a different vibe. And when we met, you said you wanted to learn because you knew so little. And so we sat, and we learned in the most old-fashioned way as a chavruta. In some respects, the idea of having the B'nai Mitzvah class, as we had it these past 2 years, was inspired by those early times that we had learning in my office, going over books you had read about Judaism and exploring the prayer book. But the thing is, Suzala, you're a serious yid. I know it, you know it, your family knows it. Every atom of you quells with Yiddishkeit. And here you are claiming the place that was always yours to begin with as a teacher of Torah. May you memorize what it feels like to complete this long process. May your laning and teaching today inspire you to tell yourself a new story about who you are as a Jew and as a woman, as a human being. And may your family and friends here today be inspired by your journey to claim their own journey, their own voice in their stories. And now, I'm resisting the impulse to hug you, but we'll get there. Karen, please come forward. Karen, you have the distinguished honor of being the longest time member among this group. Now, admittedly, it's not the hardest thing to do, but still, by a long shot, you've been here more than most people. And I looked it up, you might correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that you and Anshul joined 40 years ago this November. Does that sound more or less right? And though I hope those 40 years were obviously more pleasant than the wandering that we've spent a lot of time reading about, you are today precisely where the Israelites were, or rather are, in your Parsha. Looking back at all you've experienced, considering these 40 years, but also those of living Jewishly, even before that. And you're also looking ahead at what comes next. Early on, Karen, you shared with me that you were pretty hesitant about standing up in front of the congregation and getting through this ritual, and you did it beautifully. You've also been a deeply committed Jew throughout your life, but the chance to read from the Torah wasn't available to you as a kid. Still, if your children could do it in this very synagogue, if your grandchildren could do it, which you've delighted watching and will watch, and you've shared so much of that, then you said, so could you. And here you are, having done it. May you continue to find so many more moments to delight in Torah with your family. May you find ever more opportunities to participate in the life